Let's make sure we're in good shape here. It looks like I think we're okay. Did this just go live just now, or have I been live for like 5 minutes? Because if I've been live for like 5 minutes, that is what was supposed to happen. And all right, let's check it out and make sure nothing is in the dumper, for Pete's sake. Did this just... No, it looks fine now. Poop. I said all kinds of important things in the last 5 minutes, too. So we were not actually late. YouTube actually choked. That was the problem. Actually, I think what it was is that I navigated away from the YouTube studio page. That normally is not a problem, but apparently it was tonight. So sorry about that. When will then be now? Just now. I do remember that scene, of which a big to-do was made relatively recently in the YouTube physics community, which is another thing that I follow. Anyway, thank you for stopping by. We have 43 people already, and considering that 5 minutes have elapsed and nothing except mistakes have occurred, that's pretty good. So we are, in fact, clipping a time for Trumpets. We are drinking Johnny Walker Double Black because it's good and I like it. We might need to drink a bunch more. So I didn't want to make a social media thing about this because I don't want people to get discouraged. But I have been experiencing pretty severe muscle pains for the last week or so, and I am reasonably sure it's a side effect of the COVID vaccine. So if I end up drinking more than usual tonight, that might be why, and not that you're all aggravating me. So, more in the Pacific news. Isn't that nice? Love that. So, it's not in the box or loose or stuck in any of the booklets or anything. It's just not there. Thankfully, it is not an important counter. It's a generic Japanese brigade. So, this just happened. Frankly, this shirt was clean. So, that's why we're wearing Jim Beam garb this evening. Time for Trumpets obviously is going to be a huge project to clip because it's an enormous game and it's 12 counter sheets. For some reason, the counters start with the British, which is fine. So I didn't realize Mo had anything going on tonight, actually, and I hope not, because I scheduled these things on a specific night at a specific time, specifically, so that I won't be stepping on anybody else's business. So, Mo, sorry about that. If I'm hogging all the stuff, and he's doing what looks like his preview of The Lamps Are Going Out, which mine went live on Thursday. And that is what I explained all this already, but the stream wasn't going yet. That is one of the things that drove me to this particular topic this evening. Was the fact that the new edition of The Lamps Are Going Out, which is a game, if you watch the unboxing video, you know I haven't played it, but it's supposed to be very good. And the components in this new printing are a significant upgrade from the components in the last printing, which had a, let's say, less attractive map that was not mounted. Now it is on a more attractive map that is mounted, and now it's on thicker counters instead of thinner counters, and the counters are pre-rounded for people who don't like to clip their counters. I think it's a significant component upgrade. Now, whether it's worth it to an owner of the first edition or not, I can't say. On the other hand, I think we should want to support, where possible, the games that we like, right? Whether that's something from Compass or GMT or Grognard Simulations or whoever. Maybe we'll get to clipping that thing at some point. The one I have is like the small one. It's the Eris game, so I don't think I have the big Normandy thing or whatever the other new huge thing is. I'm not sure how much of their Normandy stuff is out. So I'm not sure when the replay will start either, because I've been yakking for 10 minutes now and not 5. So, anyway, hopefully everybody's doing good tonight. and there are no huge stream problems. So let me mention, because I never end up talking about this on the stream. Supporting content creators on YouTube that you like. You know, if you would like to check out the merch store, that would be great. If you would like to become a Patreon patron, that would be awesome. There are links to those things in the video description. But in general, you can help out and help support channels that you like by subscribing to them, liking the videos, commenting on the videos, and hitting the little notifications bell. You don't necessarily have to have notifications on your phone, because I certainly don't have YouTube notifications going on my phone, because it would drive me absolutely bananas and I would get nothing done. But you could turn off those notifications on your phone. So I'm a little bit unclear as to exactly how this bad boy is going to be organized, because, let's see, 43rd Infantry Division, because I can only fit 3 counter trays in the box once all of the counter sheets are out of the way. And it's going to be a lot to fit this whole thing into 3 counter trays. We'll see what I can do. I mean, I am fairly good at this, but you know, there's only so much you can do sometimes. And I don't particularly like the option of storing stuff outside the game box. You know, a step I am reduced to an annoying percentage of the time. We're okay, right? I think we're okay. It looks like we're okay. I just want to keep an eye on things. So, since we did have a hiccup already. RPGs. So there is, I'll give you a preview, and we'll mention these things again later. There is a RPG video, which is part 2 of the Gods of Harn sequence, which is the last in the Gods of Harn sequence. That will be going up tomorrow, and then next week, and I've been looking forward to this for quite a while, and I've been waiting for the copy to show up. A lot of people feel that way because it's a Bulge game, and they already have as much Bulge games as they need, right? That's understandable. I don't have that many Bulge games, nor have I really played that many Bulge games, so I don't feel overdone on the topic. Nevertheless, I think I have 3 Bulge games, and I'm including this, and I believe myself to be covered. So, not 100% sure where I was, but we'll get there. There's like these generic tank steps that I'm not quite sure what to do with. Missing Seattle says properly organized, it'll be 5 counter trays, which I find completely believable. RPGs, right. So the new RPG video next week will be Against the Dark Master. It is a flip through and discussion of some of the mechanics. I have had the PDF for several weeks, so I have gone through a decent amount of it. So Purple Norseman says he attempted a small scan of Time for Trumpets. Definitely not just a Bitterwoods, this SME. Yeah, I mean, from what I can see, I agree from what I've looked at so far. And don't take that to mean that I have perused this exhaustively already. I have not. I have spent considerably more time with the Decision Vogt Emrein than I have spent with this. They're beautiful maps, beautiful components. I have very positive things to say. Eventually there'll be an unboxing of this, by the way. So their unboxing on this there's a little story in that it was going to be a buddy unboxing. So my buddy says, here, you can unbox my Time for Trumpets. So I filmed the video, put it in the queue of stuff I need to edit, and then thought about it some more, thought about it a little more, and decided I needed it myself. So the video unboxing that you'll be getting sooner or later is the second unboxing of this copy rather than the buddy copy. And between the 2 unboxing videos, I did a little bit of extra legwork on the game. Not a ton, but a little bit. So my great uncle was in the Bulge, as part of the 101st, actually. But both my grandfathers, my maternal grandfather spent the war stationed in Karachi, in what is now Pakistan, and saw zero action. My paternal grandfather was the pharmacist's mate on a Navy ship, and that ship did see a little bit of action, but I don't, off the top of my head, remember the name of the ship. It was not a large vessel. It was a destroyer or something like that. I don't read John's comment as being down on Time for Trumpets so much as possibly just, doesn't need it, because there's already a lot of games on the topic, and there are. I mean, we've talked about this on this stream before. There's a lot of games on the Bulge. Nobody's holding a gun to anybody's head to buy or play those games, so who cares? If you have enough on the Bulge already, or you're not interested in the topic, don't buy it, and okay, cool. I don't know that further comment is necessary or useful. We have an ant. And there's another thing that's been happening in here lately. So we got to deal with that. John Longshore's grandfather put together artillery shells in Kingsbury, Indiana. If it doesn't interest you, that's, okay. Yes, a new edition of Hitler's Last Gamble is also coming from Compass. That is a Danny Parker game, as I recall, and Danny Parker is well regarded as a designer and author, for that matter. And I have heard good things about Hitler's Last Gamble, but I'm probably good on Bulge games too, to be honest about it at this point. I'm trying to think if there are other battalion level Bulge games other than Vakdam, the two very different versions of Vakdam Rhine and this. Not thinking of one off the top of my head. Regiment, yes. That opens things wide open. I think Bitter Woods is regimental. Ardennes 44 is regimental. So tons of regimental games, because a regimental Bulge game is a pretty manageable game. It's going to be a 1 or 2 map game. It's not a big deal. Probably doesn't take a million years to play. Whereas a battalion level Bulge game is going to be quite large. Is probably not going to be smaller than the SPI Vakdam Rhine, and is going to be a 4 map plus affair. This is 5 maps, by the way, which lay out together in a slightly unusual way, but everything is nice and rectangular at the end. So this looks playable. The folks at most of the folks that played it at Winterfest that I was at a couple of years ago, where 2 tables of this were run by Bruno himself, most of those folks had good things to say about it at the end. Not all of them. So a couple of them didn't like it, but there were more we liked than that. Good call, Dante. Thank you. Last Blitzkrieg is battalion level, and it is an interesting system. And unfortunately, it isn't an interesting system that I like at this time. I'm willing to have my mind changed at a later time. So, Campaign for North Africa. I mean, there are people who there's. I think I mentioned before that there's somebody is posting pictures of their playthrough of Campaign for North Africa, and being good for them. But that is not. North Africa, bluntly, is not a topic that I am interested in to the degree that would be necessary for me to get into a Campaign for North Africa level simulation. And I say this as somebody who has DAC 2 and will at some point play DAC 2. But Campaign for North Africa is a whole new, it's a whole different kettle of fish. I mean, it's about the same size in terms of map footprint, but it has this huge logistical back end that you have to deal with. And it sounds funny. I think it's amusing for an OCS player to say there's too much logistical back end in Campaign for North Africa, but OCS is just totally fine. I mean, that sounds goofy when you think about it, but at least OCS is relatively easy to play, and that is not a thing that is normally said about Campaign for North Africa. Stigler, I agree. The Germans cannot win. They cannot achieve the historical notional victory conditions that they had. I think any Bulge game that allows them to do that is probably ridiculous. So what Bulge games tend to do is limit the time so that you have, say, a week or 10 days or something like that, and then you judge based on the historical progress how well the Germans did against their historical counterparts. And that's fine. I mean, lots of games do that. I feel like it's a very similar situation in a lot of ways to Market Garden because, again, beyond the scope of the campaign, the Germans can't win, but they can absolutely prevent the Allies from meeting their operational goals. And then you can call that a victory. But the Allies are on the offense in the Bulge, so preventing the offensive side. So from that standpoint, you have an Allied side in the Bulge that is facing an attacker that cannot achieve its notional victory conditions. And on the other hand, in Market Garden, you have the Germans as the defender, trying to stop an Allied attacker with difficult victory conditions, but victory conditions that are achievable. So, in that sense, Market Garden is, I think, one of the best West Front situations for Wargame at the operational level because of that. The tempo is going to be set and maintained by the attacker, right? Which is going to be the Allies. Now, the Germans, in any decent Market Garden game, the Germans are going to spend a lot of time counterattacking, but the operational tempo is being set by the Allies. And it's the Allies who are under the pressure because their victory conditions are difficult but fundamentally achievable. In the Bulge, the tempo is set less by the Germans because they are eventually just going to get swarmed, right? So as the campaign goes on, this is why a lot of these games tend to cut the thing off at 7 or 10 or 14 days, right? They tend not to go into mid-January. Because as the Allies funnel more reinforcements, including British guys, into this operational area, it becomes harder and harder for the Germans to maintain the initiative. And it is the Germans who are under the pressure as the attacker. Only they're even getting to the Meuse. They may be able to reach the Meuse, right? But that's useless without a bridgehead over the Meuse, which is much more difficult to achieve. And then the whole idea of them taking Antwerp, which is just ridiculous. So, and without that, there's no point in the operation. So a Bulge game can, for those reasons, I think, feel a bit hollow. And unappealing to some people. I think that's completely fair. All right. Stigler mentions that the old SPI Casino is one of his least favorite games ever. Brought the game to its knees with the rubble, just zero fun. I have never played that. I have a line if I so choose to accept it on an unpunched copy of the SPI Casino, and it's a reasonably well-regarded game from S&T back in the day. I don't have a water here today. That's unfortunate. A lot of that Italian, one of the reasons why we haven't really seen that many games on the Italian campaign is it's a giant grind, and it's challenging. And I've never played Thunder Casino, so I have no idea whether or how well that fits into this or not. But it's challenging to make a game on that topic fun, right? Except at maybe at the tactical level, where certainly interesting things might happen. But it is a campaign of the Allies slowly grinding their up after the first, after the landings, slowly grinding their way up the Italian peninsula in terrible terrain. My three are Wacht am Rhein, Ardennes 44, and this. On the Bulge. How many Market Garden games do I have? I have Holland 44, which is fantastic. Hell's Highway, which with the old Victory Games, Hell's Highway, which I have not played. I have It Never Snows, which is the SCS game from MMP, which I don't know. I have no judgment about that or not. I have mentioned in the past that I often don't like the big SCS games because I think they work against the strengths of the system. Enemy Action Ardennes is pretty well regarded. And I have, the big one that I have is the GTS Market Garden. I have both volumes in that now. And that is tremendous fun. And of course, it is a very interesting topic, too. It is one of my favorite World War II topics, is Operation Market Garden. Also, Normandy. My favorite World War II topics tend to be West Front topics rather than East Front topics, to be honest about it. I did at one point own about 8 or 9 different games on the invasion of Sicily. I am not at all sure that is a sensible thing to do. But and I did get rid of a couple of them, but I still have several too. I have 2 OCS games about Sicily. I got rid of Fast Action Battle Sicily, and I guess if we count that No Retreat Italian Front, got that out of here as well. Confused. And I kept Invasion Sicily, which is the old Vance von Bory's one-map Ziploc Sicily game from GMT, which I actually think is a quite good game and criminally underappreciated. But I'm also super interested in the Pacific. I'm more interested in the Pacific than I used to be. Where is this going? So thus, one reason why I wanted War in the Pacific. And so I have, at this point, I think I have space for, I was about to say I think I have space for a quick playing, small format Pacific game. However, I don't have Pacific Tide anymore. I got rid of that, not because it didn't look good, but because I just didn't feel I had space for it and was going to play it. But I do have the magazine game Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. I have another magazine game called Avenge Pearl Harbor, also out of one of the MMP magazines. And, of course, Empire of the Sun, which is, I wouldn't call fast playing, but is a classic and is playable in one sitting. But it's a brain melter, too, right? I do feel that I have played Victory in the Pacific. And Victory in the Pacific is a seminal game that I think doesn't hold up all that well today. Which isn't the same as saying I think it's a bad game. I just think I think you have competition in that complexity level and scale that plays a lot faster than Victory in the Pacific. But Victory in the Pacific is a seminal game, enormously influential on all kinds of other things. I would love to do... I actually have Flat Top, and it is unclipped. However, the trick with Flat Top is how do you get it all back in the box when you're done? And if you have a copy of Flat Top, at least the Avalon Hill Flat Top, maybe the Battle Line box is bigger, but the Avalon Hill Flat Top, you'll never get it back in the box once you clip a single counter. This is why almost every copy of Flat Top that you see that isn't in the shrink wrap has blown corners, because people tried to put baggies in the box and it didn't sit right with other games that were on top of it, and it blew the corners on the box. When I say short playing, I mean like 2 hours, 2 maybe 3 hours, and Empire of the Sun's not that fast, but Victory in the Pacific's not that fast either. Across the Pacific looks interesting, and maybe Fire in the Sky. There's a new version of that coming from Phalanx that looks pretty. I don't know anything about the game particularly, other than the old one was from MMP. War at Sea Pacific Edition is Victory in the Pacific. And then, of course, you can track down Admiral's War from Canvas Temple Publishing, which is the more recent and combined editions of both War at Sea and Victory in the Pacific. I think War at Sea was the first of the two, but I might be wrong about that. Yeah, so, I mean, at some point, we are going to clip my copy of Flat Top. I'm resigned to that, but we are going to have to come up with some kind of outside-the-box counter-storage solution for Flat Top, is what it's going to come down to. Dale, thanks for stopping by. New question, why does one clip counters? Well, it's not like we've never covered this before, but let's cover it again. So this is a dedicated corner rounding device called the Oregon Laminations Corner Rounder. It is available in multiple sizes, either direct from Oregon Laminations or through Amazon. You may be able to find it at its original Chinese manufacturer, but that might require you to navigate Chinese websites, which can be a problem. The point of clipping the counters is there are multiple reasons to do it, and there's one reason not to do it, and I'm not going to pretend that it isn't sufficient for some people. The reason why people don't do it is because they don't want to. That sounds facile, but there you have it. They have various reasons for not wanting to clip. Usually the excuse I hear is, well, I'd rather play the game than spend time clipping the counters. But I'm not here on game night clipping corners, right? I'm sitting here. We have a talk show, if you will, during which I happen to be clipping counters and not investing an enormous amount of mental effort in the counter clipping. The counters are... The reasons to do the clipping are, one, it makes the counters look better. They look better, they look neater, and it makes the counters easier to handle. There are games for which that's not a particular consideration, but for the types of hex and counter things that I play, it is certainly true that it makes the counters easier to handle. Now, these counters... these things basically explode out of the sprue. These Time for Trumpets counters. These are the new style of GMT counters, and but it's very common, especially on like Avalon Hill games and stuff like that, to see counters that tear out of the sheets to one extent or another, and we need to figure out how we're storing this stuff. So what you end up with are these dog ears on the corner that end up, when you have other stacks next to them, they end up getting caught on those other stacks and knocking them over, and that causes a lot of problems, and you don't want to deal with that. So thus we clip the corners. It is not mandatory, but unless it's a game... if it's me we're talking about, unless it's a game that already comes with rounded corners or the pieces are triangular or something strange like that, then it's getting clipped. I clip everything. At one point, I was very close to 100% caught up to having absolutely everything clipped that was in my library. And then an Origins came, and I bought like 20 games at an Origins, and have never been remotely caught up since. So, also, that's a good point. Matt mentions I organize my counters as I clip, so it makes it easier. It familiarizes me with the counter mix of the game, so there is a learning element as well. I have 4 Oregon Laminations corner rounders. So, John Longshore says it's being done for sanitary reasons. Stigler, my dex score is like a 6, so no, we're using tweezers, and I have giant sausagey fingers, so we are using tweezers, and our corners are rounded. I mean, some hexes are tighter than others, right? So it may not be necessarily true that... Interesting. Some people are very dexterous with manipulating counters with their fingers. I use tweezers. So, I mean, again, it depends, right? If we're talking about a game where it's area movement and the areas are big and there's no real stacking, then, maybe nobody cares. But if it's this thing, then I'm clipping the corners and using tweezers. Now, you'll notice, I don't know how well this will show up on camera, but I mean, you're going to notice that there are dog ears on this counter, right? This freshly clipped Time for Trumpets counter, but they're very small. So there are plenty of people who elect, for reasons of their own, to not clip their corners, and that's fine. This is a free country, and you can not clip your corners if you want to. But man, you Stigler, you should say that in a room full of Europa guys. Is all I got to say. Back in the day when there was when Europa Fest was at Origins, there would be a Europa room, and they had tweezers and giant stacks in every single hex of a giant East Front game, and they would probably all look at you like you were crazy if you said that in their presence. Mo, thanks for stopping by. Sorry if I stepped on you. I had this scheduled as usual, so hopefully it did not have an adverse effect on your attendance. T-Rexes clip because they have little arms. That's absolutely right. That is a real thing. Kaiser Bill says he just bought Excaliburs to the green fields beyond, but the counters are thin and have the abominable center nibs. I agree with that analysis of center nibs. Not a thing I like. Fortunately, they are a thing of the past. Nobody's really making counters with center nibs anymore. I just realized as usual, as I was saying it, that I'm wrong. Somebody, whose counters were they? I punched and clipped in the last year a game with center nibs on the counters, and the center nibs were nevertheless very, very minor. And I'm trying to remember what game that was, and I don't think I remember. David Thompson, thanks for stopping by. So it's all good. It's all good. It is much time remaining yet. So I'm trying to remember what game it was that had the center nibs, and then I looked at them and I was like, these aren't that bad. These are really, really tiny center nibs. I don't remember what that was. It was definitely in the last year, though. Thunder in the East. I wonder if that was it. Now I have other component quality is what we're talking about this evening. Thunder in the East has severe component quality problems. The map, art-wise, the map is very nice. Art-wise, the counters are pretty nice. But the counters tend to... It is whiff that I was thinking of, actually. You're absolutely right, Flipside. Thank you. Center nibs, but they're so small that you could safely ignore them. The counters in Thunder in the East delaminate very easily. I have personally handled 3 different copies of Thunder in the East, and all of them have had delaminating counters and a rulebook which has disintegrated after a relatively small amount of handling. So, Brian Patterson mentions that the newer Avalanche Press titles have side nibs. That may be the case, but I haven't bought anything from Avalanche Press in ages, so I wouldn't know. And that sounds snotty, but to be honest, I mean, Avalanche Press isn't really doing anything that I find interesting at this point. I do own a couple of Avalanche Press games that are older games. At least one of which I think I like, and it gets a bit of an unfair shake. Is that here? It is, but I'm not getting it off because it's on the top shelf. That is the Imperium Third Millennium game, which takes a bit of a bad rap. I don't think it's as bad as people think. I've played it. I didn't think it was as bad. PDFs will never delaminate. That's true. So I guess if you really want, I guess it's possible for you to say, I don't wish to buy. I really need to have. Yes, Avalanche Press is still around. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, they're still around. Mike Benninghoff, the guy at Avalanche Press, had a statement released some few months ago now. But I haven't bought anything from them in a long time. Pretty much, as far as I can tell right now, they do Panzer Grenadier and the very Great War. So they have the Great War at Sea and Second World War at Sea, which are games that people like, but I have never played those. So, Loquitur Gaming asks, do I think GMT will reprint Thunder in the East as they print the newer games in the series to fix component issues? I hope so. I think that series has a lot of potential, and I think, unfortunately, it's kind of the poster child of our topic tonight, in that, it's got components that, if you see a picture of them, you're like, "Ooh, these look nice," and they do. But then when you actually handle them and play with them, they have numerous problems. I also feel like Thunder in the East is a bit lost in its own marker miasma. There's markers for every friggin' thing in that, and they're all different shapes and sizes and colors, and it's weird. And that is probably absolutely me saying that I just don't like change. This is too much change. It's too different. But the thing is, it's not a particularly different game design. I mean, it's based on Battle for Moscow, right? I think the series is something I'm keeping an eye on. I look at their posts when they post something new about it. But I do hope that it will be reprinted by that Thunder in the East will be reprinted by GMT along with any new volumes in the series. I certainly hope it will be finished, because they're certainly taking their time getting distracted with it. And I sold mine too because of the component issues. I'm like, you know what, this friggin' thing's going to fall apart if we try and play with it. So I may rebuy it if GMT does a new edition, and I've heard good things about it, and all that other stuff. All those other things happen. That could happen. But I mean, we're all a bit pretentious at the end of the day, right? So that is a label that I'll just have to live with. Terrence Bonham says it took him a week to clip this, which I find totally believable. If I get clipping done outside of this stream, then I'll have it. I can have it done by next week, but that's not really been happening all that much. So, Mo says he plays his war games while taking bubble baths. I mean, that's why we use Plexi to keep the soap off the maps, right? I mean, I'm a pretty fast clipper, but I've spent, I bought a partially punched, complete, it turned out, partially punched Atlantic Wall. This is the Decision Atlantic Wall. It has about 3,600 counters or something like that. It's a lot of counters. I mean, I had to, of course, go through it counter by counter to make sure that it was all there. Because in the same deal, the Wacht am Rhein was actually not complete. It's missing one unit counter too, not just a random marker. It took me 2 or 3 months to go through all that, punch and clip everything, organize it all, make sure it was all there. So it absolutely can be time consuming, but you sit here and do it while watching TV or something like that. So I mean, that's the thing, is if I wasn't here with all you fine people, I would be watching Netflix or something like that while doing this. So it's not like this is preventing me from gaming. That's not happening. Tony, I've heard that about DVG specifically, and I don't know that that's something. I mean, the only DVG game I own or have ever owned is Field Commander Napoleon, which I guess the boards are a little glossy, but not enough to bother me. All right. I got to figure out how to organize these things. What are these? So these are the Allied dispersed companies, which look like they're organized as kind of a separate core, which I take to be a bunch of non-core units. So the bouts and maps, I mean, it's a big game. If we're talking about the relatively recent Lob Tie bouts in game, which is really more of a kit than anything else. Don't expect a finished game out of that, or a game free of catastrophic errata. Well, I mean, that's true. It's, I'd rather do this than paint miniatures, to be honest. I am far more tempted by miniatures, to the extent that I am tempted by miniatures. I'm far more tempted by RPG miniatures than I am miniatures for wargames. It doesn't do it for me at all. I think that you are going to get a more interesting simulation out of a hex and counter game than you are a miniature game. Surely there are very detailed miniature games and very simple hex and counter games. That's absolutely true. But at the same time, the fact that you can put all these little pieces of information on a counter, and the counters can all be different if they need to be, speaks to the fidelity of this, at least potentially, the simulation. And you don't have that, or at least don't have that easily with a miniature game. Very unclear as to how I'm organizing this. These dispersed commands, guys. And there's just a ton of them. Ken Cloby asks about Company of Heroes. So, correct me if I'm wrong. Company of Heroes is the thing from Academy Games? Is that it? Or is that Conflict of Heroes? Because if it's the thing from Academy Games, I have played that. At the end of the experience, I didn't need to play it again. But there's a lot of people that like it, right? Just don't, because I didn't like it, don't take that as being definitive. Dante Edmundo, only miniature game he enjoys is War of the Ring. If that's the Citadel Games Workshop Tolkien thing, that's actually a pretty cool game. In the garage, there is, I believe, a gigantic tray of primed but unpainted Riders of Rohan. That was the last miniatures game that I got into many, many years ago. Oh, cool. Flipside has picked up ASL Starter Kit number 1. Starter Kit number 1 is a great place to start. There are people who will say, you shouldn't play ASL Starter Kit because it will give you bad habits. Those people are wrong, and you should not listen to them. It is a marvelous distillation of a very complicated game. There are absolutely a few habits that you will have to relearn in full ASL if you decide to graduate to full ASL, which you are not obligated to do. But you will not have to relearn any rules, and that's important. Company of Heroes by Bad Crow. Okay, then if that's the case, I have no idea what game we were talking about. So the grief is that that starter kit, because it does not include snipers, doesn't sufficiently disincentivize you from making garbage attacks because you aren't worried about triggering a sniper on a garbage attack. That is true, but it is also a thing that you will overcome very quickly should you graduate to full ASL. Or should you decide to just keep playing starter kit and just keep adding in stuff from full ASL as you are ready or as you need it based on the scenarios you are selecting. That is something that you can actually do pretty easily. You can play starter kit and just say, you know what, let's use bypass movement. Why not? Or the other 3 infantry rules that are missing from starter kit. There's a lot of little corner cases that are in that big ASL rulebook, but, you know, they're corner cases. That's why they're... who cares, right? If they come up, they come up. If they don't, they don't. Don't worry about it. So, and starter kit gives you a nice progression path to work your way up to. So, starter kit number 1 is just the infantry actions. Number 2 brings in guns and ordnance. Excuse me. Number 3 brings in vehicles. And number 4 brings in a variety of things from the Pacific. The biggest thing of which, from a core mechanic standpoint, is concealment. DCB says, board gamers provide nothing to the end product other than clipped counters. They contribute nothing artistic or otherwise. Who cares? Who cares? I don't care. I have, to the extent that I have creative impulses, I have a YouTube channel. So, I mean, that's not important to me. But, you know, some people don't have a creative outlet. People have different creative outlets. Some people they knit and only knit from patterns. They're not producing anything new either. So what? They're enjoying what they're doing. This is a hobby. This is not a responsibility. All right. High Flyer asks, talk about my Baltic Gap preference. So I think what we mean is why I like Baltic Gap and why it is perhaps my favorite OCS game. I think it is my favorite OCS game. So Baltic Gap is a 2-map, I believe, 5 counter sheet game. So it's not a small game, but it's on the small-ish side for OCS games. There's not that many OCS games that are smaller. It's got a lot to work with, and it has all of the various OCS things that make OCS fun and or cool to play. You have to worry about extenders, you have to worry about supply chains, you have to worry about massive German counterattacks, because the Germans retain a great deal of punching power. So it squeezes a lot into its 2 maps. All of the various things that I like about OCS are really strongly evident in Baltic Gap, and that is why it is one of my favorites. I mean, you could certainly have a fabulous Baltic Gap experience playing Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2. I've played that. That's a great game, but it's 3 times this big, right? So you're investing a bigger amount of time and bandwidth and space to get to it. So we can play Baltic Gap at a 4-day convention and get sufficiently far into it that we come to a decision point about who's winning or who's losing at the end of the 4 days. And that's harder to do with larger OCS games. I mean, there's a guy who... it's really kind of a... I hate to use the word vacuous, but it is a bit of a vacuous point. I have done, fancy... Do I have any of those here? I don't think I do. I've done fancy player aids and counter tray inserts and stuff like that. Are those not... Does that not count as much as painting your little men? I mean... So... Yeah, that's not a thing, and to the extent that it is a thing, it's not even accurate. So, Phil says the starter kit rules are quite clear. So, yes, but the caveat there is that the big full ASL rulebook is not written to be clear. It is written to be exhaustive. So it is not a rulebook that's written with teaching the game in mind at all. And I think anybody that's looked at that rulebook will agree with that. It is a reference rulebook, not a teaching rulebook. ASL Starter Kit is a teaching rulebook, and I think does very well at that. And I think that's why it absolutely reads as so much clearer than the full ASL rulebook. It is, but it is because it is written with a different goal in mind. Now we're talking about the operational art. I wasn't even going there. So, I mean, if I want to, if my goal as a wargamer is to express myself artistically, then sure, I should be playing a miniatures game, but I mean, to what extent is that true for most wargamers? I think it isn't. I think one only has to go to a miniatures event and see, like Historicon, and see the percentage of unpainted miniatures that are floating around right there, to show that are those people not sufficiently contributing artisticness to the hobby because their miniatures are unpainted. I mean, this is a nowhere discussion, and I think it's a bit silly. The best way, Ken Kloby mentions, the best way to learn ASL is by playing with someone who already knows it. That's absolutely true. That is absolutely right. And to be honest, I mean, there are many games where that's really the only way to learn them. And you know, not even limited to war games. I encourage you to take a look at the old white box D&D. In a somewhat famous story, Ken St. Andre, who's the designer of Tunnels and Trolls, you know, it's 1975 or something like that, and Ken gets hey, this is new game, it's very popular, D&D, and he gets the white box D&D and looks at it and says, this is gibberish. What do you even do here? And then he observed a session and said, oh, okay, I can make something that makes a lot more sense, and he did. That early edition of D&D, this is why I have such disdain for that flavor of the old school Renaissance that seems to feel bizarrely that like the original D&D was somehow the more valid D&D. Original D&D, from like a standpoint of you bought it in a store and now you got to take it home and figure out how to play it, is not good. It's a incredibly sloppily assembled and put together as a rule book, right? People didn't learn how to play it that way. They learn. I mean, once you sit there and do it, it is actually relatively simple. And remember also that players at the time, based on some weird ideas that Gary had, were actively discouraged from actually learning or knowing the rules. So I'm going to let the chat work itself out on this whole thing and move on to more interesting subjects. For example, so I mean, I'm just going by I think what's the Games Workshop event called? Games Day? There used to be a Games Workshop event in Games Day. See, the trouble, DCB, the trouble you're going to have here is that you are preaching here to a audience that doesn't that is badly positioned to agree with you. Let me put it that way. I have no complaints with people playing miniatures if that's what they want to play. It does not interest me. It's just not interesting. So, to me, right? That it doesn't mean it's not interesting to you or can't be interesting to you. If I am seeming dismissive of miniatures, and I'm gonna finish saying this, and then we're gonna move on. If I seem dismissive of miniatures, it is with good cheer that I am, and an attempt at least at humor to do that. I did do miniatures for quite a while, which included, RPG miniatures to whatever extent, depending on what we were playing at the time. It included, I was playing 40K back when it was Rogue Trader and was actually cool, as opposed to whatever 37th edition they're on right now. So, which, I did that Iron Kingdoms thing, whatever that friggin' thing's called, from Privateer Press. I did that for a while. I did the Lord of the Rings game, which I still like and haven't gotten rid of the miniatures. So, I am not attempting to dismiss miniatures, but I believe you are preaching to the wrong audience in this case. So, component quality. To what extent does component quality drive your purchases? Is it important, for example? Does whether a game, regardless of the price, let's assume that the price matches the component quality, does it make a difference where, to the extent that you say, I'm going to buy this game and not this other game because this game has a mounted map and this other game has an unmounted map? Do you say, this game has thicker counters than this other game, so therefore I'm going to buy this game? I don't think I do, but I also think that there's a floor too, where if I learn that a game has really atrocious component quality, I will stay away from that game if it is like legit atrocious. I would probably not buy Thunder in the East again, for example, solely for two reasons. One, I ended up getting rid of it anyway. And two, because of its numerous component problems. One would make the case that D&D has in fact gone viral in the last couple of years thanks to stuff like Critical Role and streaming and stuff like that. Now, I will also tell you, I'm a Traveler guy, right? So some of those old little black books. And, when the time came to, run Traveler, we didn't make the call to play Classic Traveler. We were going with Mongoose Traveler 2nd Edition. But that's not because of the component quality. That's because I think there are expectations that I have of a modern RPG that Classic Traveler doesn't have. I want there to be a task resolution system. There is an implied task resolution system in Classic Traveler, but I'm getting distracted. There are essentially one or two illustrations in the entire game of Classic Traveler in all three of those books, right? The covers are pretty classy with the classic black and red and all that, but so Mo thinks good components make me feel like the investment is worth it. He does have a soft spot for garage kit games like Victory Point games. Those games were cheap, though. That was the thing. Or at least relatively inexpensive. I'm not sure I felt like they were quite as inexpensive as their component quality would suggest. Jeffrey says that he's willing to pay more to get Jaws of Victory level graphic design encounters. That is a very nice package. I will absolutely say that. Missing Seattle says if he's paying $150, he wants great components. I would agree, but maybe I'm paying $150 because there's a lot of components. Block Oddity says he wants to try the lamps that are going up, but the dark black Switzerland and mountains turned me off so much. I don't I have to assume you're pulling my leg with that statement. Tony says component quality is often only discovered once the money is spent. Well, that's one reason why I do unboxing and why I watch unboxing videos. If I'm on the fence about something, I'll watch an unboxing video to get a sense of the components and how nice they are. We are not talking about we are not using the M word for the rest of the chat. Okay. Does rulebook quality count as component quality? How about player aids and such? I guess I had graphics in mind when I named the chat, but yeah, it counts as component quality. A game with a shitty rulebook is, I mean, that's a big detriment if it has a shitty rulebook, right? Jason Williams says he played Rostov 41, but he would happily play more money for a map with bigger hexes and counters big enough to read, not printed in black ink on brown counters. So that's not an MMP thing. It's a gamer's thing, and it is something. I mean, I didn't have a problem with the Rostov 41 counters as such, but there are examples out of the gamers' games where I do think there are contrast issues. So. Dale Brody asks if I can still die during character creation in the Mongoose game. There's an optional rule for it, but basically the answer is no. That actually hasn't actually been the case since Classic Traveler, pretty much. It's pretty much been an option since, after post-Classic Traveler. I've talked about this on Traveler videos. The long time running joke about Traveler is that you can get killed during character creation, okay, which is true for Classic Traveler. The reason why it's part of the balancing mechanism for characters, and you might think, well, that's a terrible balancing mechanism, isn't it? But the fact is, you're not taking 2 hours to make the character either. You make the character in 5 minutes. If you get killed in character creation, you have not invested any significant amount of time in that character. You start over and do it again. And if you die again, you start over and do it again. And within about 20 or 25 minutes, you'll end up with a living character. And then that will affect the chances that if you do another term, you can die, is a thing that you have to keep in mind as you're going through that character creation system. Oh, yeah, we're going to put these away before we move on to the next one. So, no, you cannot die during character creation in Mongoose Traveler. Like I said, there's an option for it, but it's not really set up that way. Stegler, poorly written rules are not a component issue, that's a design and development issue. I agree with that. I mean, clearly the root of that problem is in the design and development, but it affects the quality of a component that you get in the box, too. So... certainly, MMP has not updated. Not MMP. The gamers, and a lot of people sort of mentally put that together with MMP as a whole. MMP does a lot of different game lines, and they don't all look like Dean Essig games. If that is, in fact, to whatever extent that is an actual problem that people have. And let's not pretend that there aren't plenty of people who have expressed that feeling to me. There are quite a few people that don't like their graphics. That is absolutely a thing. But again, it's more a gamer's thing than it is an MMP thing. Although, I will also say that there are certainly ASL is not a graphically modern game either. It's the same problem, but it looks different. I mean, it's a different dated style. Let me put it that way. I don't have any problem with a non-color rulebook. Now, if the rulebook is dependent on color, like we really need color to show these examples because the game's complicated, then it might be a problem if the game book is in black and white. Normally, I don't think by itself, a black and white rulebook is a problem. Last Stand does look good, actually. That's a game by a Japanese designer, I believe, and the box looks great, too. I am also a big fan of Mark Simonich's map art. I really like, and counter art for that matter, but the maps, I feel like I can do decent-looking counters. My map skills are garbage, so if I compliment Mark Simonich's maps more than his counters, that's why. So a bunch of the international series games specifically do not look anything like an OCS or SCS game. And I will point out that the one time SCS decided that they were going to try and do a different map art style was in Day of Days, and everybody complained that it looked, including myself, ended up complaining that it looked like crap, because it looks like crap. So, despite having a great artist in charge. So it's not even about, I mean, maybe the artist turned in the art and they ruined it in post-production. I don't know, that's possible. Okay, we've got a bunch of like random aircraft on this sheet in random places, and I'm not sure I understand what's up with that, but whatever. We got leaders here too. Interesting. This would be sheet number out of order. So thanks, Cataclysm, now for stopping by while you have a break. I do tend to whine about it when I get counters that are like not cut square. That is something that excuse me, by the way. That is something that I have had happen from GMT. In 2 games in the last couple of years. What was the other one? The one was Death Valley, actually, which was pretty irritating. And I forget what the other one was. Where not all the counters were the same size. So, I mean, I feel like I don't want to say the component quality is like this huge overriding concern, like it's the main thing that I look at, but there's definitely, you know, I definitely think it's important, and it should inform the buyer's decisions. And there is definitely, and everybody's going to get to set this line where they want. There's definitely a line below which the component quality is simply insufficient. And where is that line? So, yes, my Death Valley had misaligned counters on one counter sheet. Pretty irritated by that. Not bad registration. Some of the counters are off square. So some counters are wider than other counters. It's kind of like a worst case scenario. We didn't get to Manteuffel because he's on the German sheet, presumably. So DMAW says black and white example of play was a big issue with the first BCS game. I didn't play last Blitzkrieg, so I'm going to have to take your word for that. I played Brazen Chariots and Baptism by Fire. I actually have slowed way down and buying stuff too, and I've got some stuff on pre-order, and you know, part of that's just general financial woes and stuff like that I'm not going to talk about. That's a great question, Stigler. I don't know, and I, you know, probably should have called GMT and squawked about it, and I'm sure they'd have sent me a new counter sheet, and I just never got around to it. Have I ever bought a game strictly because it's pretty? I don't think so. I don't think I have. I might be deluding myself with that, but I don't think I have. Certainly, I think more often with RPGs am I tempted by cover art. And I might be tempted by cover art, but I'll also do a little bit of legwork and not just randomly pull the trigger on stuff just because the cover looks nice. I mean, I can name a whole pile of RPGs, like the Metabarons RPG, for example, which is a wonderful cover art, and the game didn't interest me, so I didn't buy it. Same thing applies to, a variety of war games. Some of the Patton's Third Army? It is Patton's Third Army. The old Victory in the West game from SPI. Atrocious cover art on that thing. On the cover of the magazine in this case. Atrocious. It looks terrible. And yet, I have that. And I will play it at some point. Because the game is supposed to be pretty good. Cover art, I suppose, is another facet of component quality, but it's more subjective than some of the other components of component quality. Haha. And it's more prone to being a subjectively judged thing. There are certainly some people... Oh, what was it? Compass Games has a game coming out that I think is called Grenada or something Grenada or something Grenada. It's based on the Sekigahara system, and it's about the Reconquista in Spain. It's an interesting topic. Somebody posted a picture of the box on... I think the designer posted a picture of the proof copy of the box on Facebook, and I said, wow, that's a really amazing looking cover, or something like that. And of course somebody jumped in because we got to do this. Oh, I think it looks gaudy. I mean, I just can't, okay. You just are an unhappy person, I guess. But it's subjective too, right? Art is art, and to the extent that we got to keep these leaders separate here because they're going in their own compartment. Interesting. There's a lot of leaders here, as you'd expect of a game this size on this subject. Now, I will say that so that's another example. Jeffrey mentions Nevsky, which is a piece of cover art that a lot of people complained about when it was unveiled via pictures. And I will say, so there's a couple things about that cover art, and I'm not going to say if you hated that cover art that you are wrong and you should like it. It looks different than almost all other wargame cover art. And that it looks different is good, whether we like that particular art or not. There are too many people doing... And I'll be honest, I can name exactly one person that does, wargame box cover layout. That's Roger McGowan. But I know Roger doesn't do every game in the hobby either, and a lot of people are basically trying to be Roger McGowan, and they do not do it as good as Roger does, and so their covers look imitative and limp in comparison to the authentic Roger McGowan, cover. So I would rather see a different styles of cover than see everybody trying to be Roger, right? The other thing is I do think that the Nevsky box art looks better in person than it does on a picture on the internet. And that's weird, because I'm not sure I understand why that is, but I have seen that on numerous occasions with different examples. When Compass did their version of Fortress Europa, I saw the counters, and I'm like, man, there's so much gutter space on that counter. The factors are so small. Why is there all that wasted space? Why couldn't you make the factors bigger? But then I went to Compass Expo and I saw it on a table, and it was something that I was like, yeah, that doesn't bother me at all. And somebody said at the time, no, it's fine. Don't worry about it. And they were absolutely right. When you saw them in person, it actually looks fine. So there is a difference between seeing the pieces in person and seeing a picture of them on the internet. Sometimes, at least. The Red Storm box cover is very nice. Peloponnesian War is very nice. Napoleonic games and Civil War games, for that matter, have an advantage in that there are often paintings of the battles or of the leaders or something like that that are no longer in copyright and can just be used because they're in the public domain. That is possible to do with World War II as well, but they're pictures, which means that you tend to want to kind of collage them together, which is a thing that Roger McGowan is known for. And honestly, I don't think anybody else is as good at doing that as he is. So I do like a nice map, I will tell you that. Let's take a look at where we were at here on the stream. It looks like we were up to 89. We'd probably have had more people if I hadn't farted this much. I'm sorry about that. So I did eat dinner just before the stream. So, but part of the charm here is that, you know, I've invited you all over for chit chat and counter clipping and maybe Scotch. So, and we are doing actual Scotch this time too. Redmond Simonson was a genius. I think just as much of a genius as Jim Dunnigan was, and it's a damn shame he's no longer with us. Did so much with such garbage tools that they had at the time. I mean, they literally, some of their stuff is done in like 2-color, and it still looks amazing. And graphically, I had some random non-wargamer person comment on a picture that some wargamer shared about how awesome the graphic design work from, I forget what SPI game it was. And I'm like, yeah, that's Redmond Simonson, man, because he was a genius. So there is a lot of... John Longshore mentions that there's too many games and it's survival of the fittest. And I think that quality over time, quality can, at least some of the time, rise to the top despite market pressures against it. Every movie that you can think of that nobody went to see in the theater and yet is considered a timeless classic nowadays. A lot of genre movies this qualifies for. I mean, Blade Runner is one. It did garbage business in the theater, and yet it is considered a timeless classic now. John Carpenter's The Thing. Nobody went to see that. It was in the same year that E.T. came out, and E.T. totally buried it, and yet it is considered a timeless classic now. So if the Thing can like hang around in its niche long enough and is like legitimately really good, I think it will eventually attain something like that kind of status. All right, so let's... Trevor at Russell Smith says, the best Scotch I've ever had. The best Scotch I've ever had is probably a Macallan 25, but that's $1,500 a bottle, and I can't afford that. The best Scotch, the best like standard distillery single malt expression that I have had is, and I'm talking like not the super old stuff, I'm talking like the standard regular expression, is probably Kalila 12, but I will say that Ledaig, which is is it a Highland? I think it's a Highland Scotch, is really, really, really good. And I would be absolutely drinking it right now if I could buy it in Ohio. SPI was Simulations Publications, Inc., as John Longshore mentions. It was not one of the founding companies of wargaming, but it was an early major influence on the wargaming hobby. They went out of business in very early 1982, were absorbed, long story here, but were absorbed by TSR, which kind of kept it around as a brand name for a while. And then TSR eventually decided they weren't interested in this wargaming thing anymore and sold it off to Decision, sold the rights to the games off to Decision Games, which is why the current Decision Games logo looks a lot like the SPI logo. If we're talking about OSC, so somebody mentioned here, so OSG is Operational Studies Group. That's basically Kevin Zucker They have done other stuff in the past, but nowadays they pretty much do exclusively Napoleonic games. And then there's OCS, which is the Operational Combat Series, which is a series of games that are operational games from Multiman Publishing and or the Gamers. So, interestingly, when the time came to... I got this story from Eric Lee Smith, I believe. Apparently, Redmond Simonson showed him the original masters for War in the Pacific, and it was a few years after its publication. Apparently, they had shrunk so much that they didn't line up anymore when you tried to put them together, because they were not on, like, paper. They were on some kind of acetate, which explains a lot, actually. It explains why, when TSR decided they were going to reprint, and I didn't know this, I'm not a graphic designer guy, TSR redid Terrible Swift Sword and Wellington's Victory. They did completely new map art. Completely new and vastly inferior. So neither the original Terrible Swift Sword nor SPI's Wellington's Victory are particularly stellar examples of SPI map art. But in both cases, they look a lot better than the TSR maps. Those TSR maps are bad. And, I mean, like... the only maps I can think of that are quite that bad are the Gamers maps from the Civil War Brigade series, which are bad. So, I'm an Isla guy. I like smoky scotches, so I am very much an Isla guy. I like stuff from Isla, and I tend to like stuff that's Highland or Island, which is technically part of the Highlands region. The Highland stuff that's on that west coast of Scotland, many of which also have similar characteristics to Isla whiskies, meaning they are, they dried the barley over a peat fire and the water came running through a bog to get to the distillery. Deluxe maps for 1914 Offensiva Outrance. I'd like to see that. Is that something you could still get? I didn't think so. Yeah, it's ugly. That TSR Terrible Swift Sword is ugly. I have the TSR. I don't consider myself a great speaker, by the way. There've been too many ums and ahs, and I've been super unfocused tonight. Possibly because I had a shit ton of caffeine. That's possible, and I've had a relatively busy week. So I do understand why some people do not like peated scotches. Nevertheless, this scotch is worth exploring, even if you don't like the peated flavor. There's plenty of unpeated scotches that are really good. I would point you in the direction of Glenkinchie, which is totally unpeated. I mean, I don't get it much in the way of peat note out of Macallan, to be honest. I'll have to check those out. I have looked at Mike Resch's site before, but not that thing particularly. Oops, we have screwed this up. Alright, we're at 9:28, so we are not going to start another counter sheet. So we are just going to sit here and chit-chat for the rest of the time. Glendronach 15 is Glendronach is a heavily sherried malt. I have never had it because I have never seen it in Ohio. That is the problem. And I do generally stop at liquor stores if I'm out of state for this reason. The best states I've been to for liquor availability were California. Not so much for availability in California, but for price. Liquor is cheap in California for some reason. Probably because people are drinking away all the money that they gave to the California government. But Balvenie is fantastic. I love Balvenie. I have never had an unsatisfying Balvenie, and I've had 3 or 4 different ones now at this point. I've had the Double Wood, which is their standard expression, which is fantastic. I've had the Caribbean cask, which is very good. I've had the single cask, which is very good, but you never know what you're going to get with single cask either. It could be crap. You don't know. That cask could be crap. That's true of any single cask expression. Bis Nunya asked about SCS works against its own strength. So SCS has 8 pages of rules, okay? It is designed to be a simple, easy to teach, easy to digest, and fast to play game. When you combine that with 5 maps and 2,000 counters, I think it is you have chosen your subject poorly, because it is not a game system that is designed to deal with that efficiently. Or in an interesting way. That's why I picked up that Glenlivet Caribbean whatever it is, and I like that a lot less than I like of anything, to be honest. I'm not a big fan of Glenlivet. I think Glenlivet's a bit boring. That said, I haven't had a lot of the fancier Glenlivets either. Kaiser Bill mentions Rauschbier, which is a fantastic German smoked beer where they smoke the barley probably over beechwood. Traditionally is how it's done in Germany. I do really like Rauschbier. Every example of Rauschbier I've had has been really strongly smoked, and it's hard to find like food that pairs with it. And I certainly couldn't drink like a 6-pack out of it, but I did enjoy it every time I've had it. Woo! Stephen Reynolds keeps a bottle of JW Red around. That is a mixer, in my opinion. The Johnny Walker Black, I'm drinking that now. This is the double black, which I think is better because it's smokier. But Brent, thanks for stopping by. See, you did that on Monday. That was bad planning. So you have failed. Michigan is just as bad as Ohio, actually. Pennsylvania is just as bad as Ohio. Kentucky's much better. Kentucky and Illinois are the 2 states that I've been to that have really good liquor selections. And that is definitely a Chicago area thing that I've seen. Benny's Beverage Depot in the Chicago area. There's really not any outside of the Chicago area. Michigan might be great for beer. Pennsylvania's okay for beer. Ohio's good for beer. ID Jester, thanks for stopping by. No, my liquor causes headaches, in all likelihood. Although, I have found that, and I have no scientific evidence demonstrating this, I have found that the better the booze is, the less you are going to get hungover from it. That could be because you are not drinking it as fast because you paid a lot for it and you're drinking it slowly and you're enjoying it. That's possible. But we did not make it to Montana when we were out that way, nor Idaho, for that matter. We did get through the Dakotas, however. So SCS's genericness is a strength in a lot of cases, right? Because it'll be like the Mighty Endeavor, right? It's a familiar topic. It's a very similar topic to Day of Days, although it's a different scale, and it feels like a completely satisfying game because it is a big scale. And Bastogne, the SCS Bastogne, again, it's a familiar topic. It's part of the Bulge again. You're not expecting a big detailed game out of it. If I'm playing a big game, I expect it to be detailed. The Kentucky Bourbon Barrel Ale, there's several different brands making that and with similarly named products, and they're all good that I've tried. There's a beer called Dragon's Breath or Dragon's Blood, something like that. That's really good. That's a bourbon barrel aged beer, I believe, too. Weirdest place for alcohol availability, Norway. All liquor stores are owned by the government and only open like 3 days a week for a few hours. So that is actually not that dissimilar from the situation here in Ohio. In the U.S., it varies state by state. At one point, so when you buy liquor in Ohio, you are buying it from the state. The state has licensed some stores to sell liquor, but you're buying it from the state still. It's ridiculous. It is a prohibition-era nonsense, and we shouldn't be doing it. Now, I completely sympathize if you say SCS just isn't detailed enough. That's understandable. But the strengths of the system, I think, do exist and are such that for certain topics, they can provide a pretty nice game experience. Just I didn't think that was the case with Day of Days. Again, you know, the Mighty Endeavor is terrific, and it's almost the same topic. Dragon's Milk, that's it. $5 for a loaf of terrible bread. That also sounds like Ohio, actually. I've heard good things about SCS Yom Kippur, but I'm not interested in that subject, so I've never investigated it at all. I was slightly tempted by Compass's new version of... for Pete's sake. The new Arab it's not even that new. It's like 2 years old now. Arab-Israeli war game from... it's a redo of Barlev. That's a bit tempting. But that's like that's a pretty comprehensive simulation of the Arab-Israeli war, or at least that particular Arab-Israeli war. There are peated whiskeys from all over the place now, not just Scotland. There's some American ones. There's at least 1 or 2 Irish ones. I think the Japanese do peated whiskey as well. And there might be... David, thanks for stopping by. There might even be some Indian peated whiskeys. I know there's Indian whiskeys. Amrut, which I've always wanted to try, and which I've never actually managed to find. Thank you, Ohio. I could get it if I drive to Kentucky, but I don't want to drive to Kentucky just to go to the liquor store, frankly. The new NATO game, the Bruce Maxwell NATO game, looks really good. It looks really interesting. I'm on board with that thing. Bruce, it helps that Bruce himself is really excited about that game and does a really good job of expressing that excitement. That is part of why it's interesting, is because I could see Bruce's enthusiasm for it. I've talked to Bruce about it a couple of times now, and he sold me on it last year or 2 years ago at Compass Expo when he had the handwritten counters, which I do have pictures of, by the way. But that's going to be a pretty completely different, not completely different, but it's going to be a substantially different game from the old Victory Games NATO. So, which I am totally fine with. Computer games. Let's hit that real quick, as we like to talk about that at least a little bit. What computer games am I doing? So, I have had pretty low enthusiasm to do computer games this week. I have played a bit more of the Elite Dangerous Odyssey Alpha. Now, this is the expansion, biggest expansion the game's ever seen. You'll be able to get out of your ship and go do stuff. And a lot of gameplay is tied into that. So you'll be able to get out of your ship and go do on-foot missions and stuff like that. It's really cool. It's an alpha. Even though it's a paid alpha, it's still an alpha. It's a bit buggy, to be blunt, but... It's also, it's really attractive, but it's desperately in need of tuning. Any combat mission. So first of all, you have threat zero missions that you go and you get off the shuttle and instantly get shot and die. It's like, this is a threat zero mission. This shouldn't happen on a threat zero mission. And we're talking not about PC fire. This is NPCs killing you. So. The tuning really it's desperately in need of tuning, but it's otherwise fairly neat. I love fresh pineapple. I think canned pineapple is disgusting. In fact, I think if you put fresh pineapple on pizza, it might actually be okay. But I've never had that. Nobody does that. It's always that canned shit that's soaked in sugar syrup. It's gross. Yeah, so at some point the topic for this Counterclip Extreme is probably going to be computer war games and why they suck. I find computer war games in almost all cases, to be deeply, deeply, deeply unsatisfying. There are enough exceptions that I think, and another handful of things that look interesting and I haven't tried. The EQ2 video is still the #1 video on the channel, by the way, for reasons which will remain mysterious to me. But it will probably eventually be overtaken by the Paths of Glory videos. Warpath. I bought Is it called Warpath? Is that what it's called? Warpath. That I have. Why do I have zoom up? God damn it. Warplan. So it looked like a slightly better version of Strategic Command, and I guess it's a slightly better version of Strategic Command. It's not any good. It's just unsatisfying. There's a Pacific version that's going to be equally unsatisfying, I'm sure. I did have a lot of fun with Hearts of Iron 3, but I dislike Hearts of Iron 4 fairly strongly. I do like Gary Grigsby's War in the East. I have not managed to successfully not suck at War in the West. War in the East 2 just came out. It looks equally good to the first War in the East, and I have War in the Pacific, and it is a big mouthful. Now, there's also the John Tiller games, which look considerably more promising than most computer war games, and I have Schult 44 queued up, and we have only just really started to fool with it. It looks like there's a lot there. Block Oddity asks about how I'm feeling post-COVID, so for those who don't know, we did basically get it at the holidays. I don't know if it was... We should have stayed home. We should have done what they said and stayed home. My wife had flu-like symptoms for a couple of days and then was better, and I had very mild symptoms, which amounted to loss of taste and smell and overwhelming fatigue for about 4 days, and then I was fine. Sense of taste is still not back. I have, as of Thursday, last Thursday, I got the first. So immunity for COVID does not just last forever. You're going to still, even if you've had it, you're still going to need vaccines. So I got the first vaccine shot. I got the Moderna vaccine. I think I'm working on the side effects of that right now with the Scotch. So miscellaneous muscle aches where I've had like a really stiff neck for several days. Ed Beach is involved in the Civ series, actually. And I wouldn't call that a war game, but I poured a ton of time into Civ 2 back in the day. I have not poured that much time into any Civ game since. I played a bit of Civ 4, but not much, like 4 hours maybe. I think I have Civ 6. I do have Civ 6, but I have it through the Epic Game Store, which I don't want to install anything through, so that's why I don't deal with that. Astroneer. Astroneer is cute. It actually looks fun. If you are interested in a space survival / building game, I like Empyrean Galactic Survival, which has not quite as robust a building as systems as Space Engineers, but the basic gameplay is not garbage like it is for Space Engineers. So there's that. The Space Engineers has a lot going for it, but its basic survival gameplay is not very interesting. Civ 4 has the virtue of being narrated by the late, great Leonard Nimoy. I have Fields of Glory. I do not find it particularly interesting. I believe it to be essentially a chess-like game, and I don't like chess games. So, at least in the case of Field of Glory, it is not the case that I think it sucks. It is the case that I don't find it interesting. Order of Battle. That's a FPS, is it not? Not an FPS, but a RTS, is it not? Because I'm not a big RTS guy. About as close to RTS as I do is the Paradox stuff. Empires does look a bit interesting, and the Fields of Glory Medieval, I'm more interested in Ancients than I am Medieval. So I can tell you that. We've had we're going to have a little bit extra here. We might go a little bit over tonight, but I don't want to go too far over. So I'm always happy to just hang out with you fine folks. We're up to, well, we're down actually, but who cares? I don't care. Still 80 people. That's a lot of people. We got some time. I could be thinking of something else too. Order of Battle. I've played one of those, I thought. Maybe I'm nuts. Who knows? I have found that I don't want to use the word sim games. Yeah, Order of Battle World War II. I've played 3.4 hours of that. Last played in 2017. I believe it's one of those things where, like, part of it's free, and I'm not remembering it clearly, so clearly it did not leave a great impression. I think it's one of those things where you get like a certain part of it for free and then you buy the rest, piece by piece, I think. That Command Modern Operations looks really good. It basically looks like modern, a modern version of Harpoon. King of Dragon Pass is neat. I will say that. Shadow Empire looks sort of interesting. I've watched some video on that as well. Never played any of the Red Alert games. So the Chief does have, Bart Brunsheen does have a Scotch channel called Scotch Test Dummies. So if you like Bart's online persona, and it's with different people than he does the board game channel with, which is why I don't watch it, actually, because I like his board game people. But I do subscribe to a bunch of different whiskey channels. So Ralphie is one, Ralfy. You search YouTube for that. He's the Scotch guy, the expert on YouTube for Scotch. You will learn a shitload about Scotch by watching Ralphie's videos. I was actually doing Scotch videos as well, like little 3-minute Scotch tasting videos, just to like record the tasting notes. And I never uploaded any of them, and they were lost in a computer migration at some point. So, the Kaiser Bill, the Paradox games are definitely in that thing. Definitely. There's, to a fault, they rely too heavily on DLC to flesh the game out. It's actually quite annoying. Kerbal Space Program. I have Kerbal Space Program, and I haven't really played it because it is got like real physics in it. Real orbital dynamics are a thing. And you can completely get lost just in that. It is pretty neat, though. And I've played a decent amount of, like, what's that called? That's not it. Universe Sandbox. A fair amount of that, too. That's pretty neat. I've got that in Universe Sandbox, too. There's another thing called Space Engine, which is sort of similar to that. And which a lot of people that do videos use to make like space graphics from their videos. Pairing scotches with different games. So the funny thing is, I don't like to drink when gaming. It makes me tired and sluggish after a couple hours. This that we're doing here is about as long as I can manage. Is there do you mean, Kenneth, do you mean a computer version of Black Orchestra? Because I'd be interested in that if that is a thing you can do. Because I've never managed to actually get the board game for Black Orchestra, which looks neat. I mean, it's the Plot to Assassinate Hitler, right, with nicer graphics. Yeah, apparently it's not something you can get on Steam anyway. I am super picky about computer war games, and to I think well beyond the point where it makes much sense. I just strongly prefer the experience of an analog game, even if I'm playing it digitally on Vassal. I prefer that. I think as simulations, most computer games, again, there are exceptions, are pretty unsatisfying. Despite the promise of the computer war game taking a lot of simulation and putting it where the players can't see, I find in practice that never actually seems to happen. Instead, we see things like Strategic Command, which has mechanics that are a little less deep than SCS, and then it has an AI that cheats, and that has no stacking, so you have things like, here's an aircraft carrier out by itself in the middle of the ocean. That never did an aircraft carrier sortie in that way, where they just sent the carrier out by itself. No, that doesn't work. It's ridiculous. It produces a historical result, but it's not even. I don't think it's even a fun game. I watched the historical gamers like complete playthrough of I forget whether it was the Global One or the War in Europe, and just was like howling at the screen. I was like, "This is ridiculous! Why is this doing this? This makes no sense." You've got like 6 successive Soviet capitals that have, I don't know if it was 6, but they had to take like the 4th Soviet capital before the Soviet Union collapsed. And as somebody who feels like the Soviet Union would not have collapsed had the Germans managed to take Moscow, there has to be a point at which the Soviets surrender, right? On the other hand, in Hearts of Iron 3, it pretty much just happens as soon as they take Moscow, which I think is also a problem, but... Grand Tactician, the Civil War. I have seen that, but don't know much about it. So, I feel like I feel obliged to have a topic, even if the topic ended up only being this very starting point for things that got talked about. So bear in mind that I do not have material on the topic to fill 2 hours of talking. I don't. Now, the War in the Pacific, the Gary Grigsby's War in the Pacific Admirals Edition, does look pretty impressive. And there's a host of impressive computer war games. It's just a lot of them, I think, are disappointing. I expect to like the John Tiller games. I agree with that. And that's the thing, though. Do you hold the super ultra primitive graphics and interface of the John Tiller games against it? I mean, frankly, that's one reason why I didn't get into the John Tiller games. I think I would probably like that Command Modern Operations. I would probably like it, but it's a project to get into it because it's super complicated. Mo, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it. We'll be back next week. So let's actually talk about the upcoming schedule. So tomorrow we have the Harn Gods of Harn Part 2. There's a number of other Harn videos in the pipeline. Now, I'll remind folks that there is a Kingdoms of Harn Kickstarter going on right now. Columbia Games is going to do hardcovers of the Kingdom modules. It's going to be the Kingdom article and a capital or major city or something like that. A couple other articles to flesh it out. They sent me a proof copy of the hardcover. That's what the video, what I showed off in the video. I had to send it back to them, so it wasn't technically a free item. It was a free peek, and it's pretty interesting because a lot of people complain to me, because I'm apparently the complaint department, that they don't like. Thanks for stopping by. That they don't like the loose leaf format that Columbia Games has technically been using for decades, and which fits really well with the current means of selling things as PDFs. But it will definitely look awesome to have a whole set of Harn Kingdom hardcovers on the shelf. So let's see what else we got queued up here. As I mentioned, the unboxing video this week is Silent Victory. Yeah, and then next week it's Wars of Marcus Aurelius from Hollandspiel, which looks like a neat game, and it's another unboxing video that's been in the hopper for like a long time, for like months. So, and I had the title card for it, so I'm like, this'll do, because I'm short on time. So, if you back the Kickstarter for $1, they will send you for your $1 the Harn map, the Harn core module, and the Harn index, which is all the core stuff. So you can get that for $1, and then if Caldor is... There are reasons why it's considered the best place to start a campaign on Harn. And the biggest reason, I think, is that you need one Kingdom book to start. And you can buy other stuff a la carte as you go through Drive-Thru-RPG or whatever. But if, on the other hand, you start a campaign up in Tharda, then you really kind of need 3 Kingdom modules, right? In Caldor, you only need 1. And the current Kickstarter is for Caldor. So, yeah, I actually think the Kingdom module, which you'll get eventually when it comes out, and between that and the stuff that you get for pledging $1, yeah, that's a great way to start. Dave asks if I'm a baseball fan. I'm an old-time Indians fan, but I'm, also tired of disappointment. So it's hard to stay, especially since I'm not there, and it's too expensive. I used to like go to Indians games. So not really. I would not really consider playing a baseball simulation game at this point. Even though back in the day, when I was a bigger sports fan of both baseball and football, I did play Status Pro baseball and football, the Avalon Hill games, and had fun with them. At the time though, I was like buying the book, the stat books every year and stuff like that. So the Browns leaving Cleveland really killed me on professional sports for a long time, and I have not managed to resume my interest level. If like the Cavaliers did, they won a championship and that was great, I didn't really watch it closely. I didn't watch the finals or anything like that. Caldor has a really cool setup in terms of the politics. You get the politics that's there. You've got the dungeon crawl. It's like built into the Tashal. It's surrounded by, like Antoil mentions, it's surrounded by mostly wilderness, so there's like and in any direction you go, you can find untamed frontier. And you only need the one, right? All this stuff, all these elements are there in Tharda as well, but to get the whole picture of Tharda, you need 3 kingdom modules, and for Caldor, you only need 1. It's nice to have Kibissa as well, but Kibissa's not that close to Caldor. You can do without it. Kibissa is a pretty good place to start, actually, but not LeBron. I mean, I'm happy the Cavaliers won a championship. That's great, but if LeBron's a great player, don't care that much, to be honest. I did notice that Jester's been playing some baseball stuff, mostly Indian stuff, which is cool. I'm a big fan of Harn. I've been a big fan of Harn I haven't done an RPG since my last Origins, so we're working on that. But that, as of today, I haven't done an RPG since the last Origins I was at, which was in 2019. So there's that. I'm a big fan of Harn. So I remember Harn being on the shelf at the time local game store back in the early 80s. So I remember seeing the stuff and being a bit baffled as to how you were supposed to approach it. And then when I dropped out of college the first time, well, I guess there was only the one time when I dropped out. This would have been 91, 92. I hooked up with some people playing Rollmaster, and he was like, the guy that was playing, I went over his house, and we did the whole spiel, and I turned out not to be an asshole, so he invited me back. And he was like, okay, we're going to run in Harn. I'm like, oh, Harn? Is that? I was like, yeah, this is, and she started showing me the materials, and I'm like, oh, this is really cool. This map is amazing, man. It was that regional map that originally drew me in, but then when I started buying the stuff, which at the time wasn't as hard to get as it is now, it became, it was like, wow, this is really cool material. It's a setting that a lot of people misunderstand because they think it is just like the strictly super low magic, super gritty, super medieval, and most of those things are true, but it's not that low magic. There's an actual deity on the island making crazy monsters and sending them out into the world. There's literal demigods living on the island. There's all kinds of high fantasy stuff, and it's structured in such a way that you can turn that dial however you want. You want it to be low fantasy and super gritty and super Game of Thrones, and there's hardly any magic and no wizards. You can do that. But if you want there to be, there's orders of wizards on the island. If you want orders of wizards and, trade and magic items and weird creatures of whatever kind you want, it's there too. So it is up to you as the group to decide where you want that lever to live. Dave asks about the Atlanta stuff. I am not sure which Atlanta stuff he means. However, if you are talking about the old Bard Games Atlantis stuff, that was actually pretty neat stuff. Although, I have, what do I have? I have the Arcanum, which is actually pretty neat, like D&D-esque system for its day. I have the Arcanum, the original Arcanum, the second edition technically. They redid it a few years ago. in a not an edition that I didn't like. Let me put it that way. And I don't want to try to articulate why I didn't like it, because I don't own it, and I don't want to misstate anything. The setting was pretty neat, too. Sort of it was very an antediluvian age, Robert E. Howard-esque type of setting, and that was neat. We ran Rollmaster in that setting more than once. There's some things missing from it, frankly, that I think you'd want, like a good list of deities. There is a list of deities somewhere, and it's more or less a kit bash of Stigler. Thank you for stopping by. We'll see you next week, hopefully, and we will definitely be back next week. We got a few more minutes till I finish this. Is the idea. So this Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, I will be on with Dan on his channel, No Enemies Here, and we are going to talk, I think, about game stores. That's our newbie-friendly Wargamer chat, which really belongs on Dan's channel and not mine, but, you know, that's okay. We are happy to help him out, as the case may be. MLB All-Star Game Atlanta stuff. I honestly haven't paid much attention to that, to be honest. So we're not going to talk about politics. It's a way to piss people off, and we're not talking about that or anybody else's drama here. Is 10 for Trumpets a monster game? Absolutely, it is. It's 5 maps, 12 counter sheets, and a good chunk of it can be played in a week-long convention. So yeah, I would call it a monster game. I mean, I don't think a reasonable definition of monster games can be constructed to exclude this. Let me put it that way. It's big. There's a lot of pieces. It takes a long time. It's a monster game. I tend to feel like the most meaningful metric for determining whether a game is a monster game or not is the playtime, rather than the footprint. So we can play a game like... What's a good example? Okay, so we could play a scenario from Pacific War. And the scenario might take us 4 to 6 hours to play. Okay, now I'm not saying all the scenarios can be played that amount of time. But I think you can find one map scenarios out of Pacific War, at least in the new version, which will be set up so that you can do that. And... So 4 to 6 hours, is that a monster game? I say no. But at the same time, the footprint on that, you know, in the old edition, you'd probably still need both maps. The amount of display space you need for Pacific War is insane. So you're talking about like 4 maps worth of map space for a 4 to 6 hour game. Does that make it a monster game or not? I think for a lot of people it might, but I think the most interesting metric, like I said, is the playtime. If you play it in a day, I don't consider it a monster game. But again, who cares, right? It's just because I say that's what it is. It doesn't mean that's what it is. So I will tell Dan to put a bag over his head. I won't do that. That would be mean-spirited. I don't want to be actually mean-spirited. We all love Dan. He is the literal crazy uncle of the Wargaming on YouTube community. I think David has tucked in for the night, but I really like having David on as a guest too, particularly for the topics that we pick, which is why we thought of David. But David always makes a great guest. So, and to be honest, David's doing some really, really good and interesting design work as well. That unfortunately does not necessarily 100% cross over with my tastes, but he's definitely finding interesting topics and treating them in interesting ways. So, we have a couple more minutes. I'm not going to just throw this down because it is not particularly inexpensive Scotch. So we're not going to be shooting it. 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday. That is a weekly thing, but it flip-flops from channel to channel. So this week it's on Dan's channel. Next week it'll be back here. Yeah, don't think Dan takes himself seriously, by the way. And so just so we're all clear on that. I'm tempted. I got an enormously large head, so I'm pretty sure if I bought those helmets, they wouldn't fit my head. But apparently, Dan was able to get most of that fine headgear from Amazon, which is pretty awesome. And then we'll be back here on Monday, of course, at 8 p.m. This is definitely a regular thing now. So let's just take a look. We peaked at 93 today, which is really amazing. So I'm very pleased that all you folks came out to hang out with me while we started clipping Time for Trumpets. We're going to be clipping this thing for quite a while. So I was tempted to start punching War in the Pacific, but I'm not. If money was no object, what kind of Scotch would I choose? I'm not sure I would do anything that differently, to be honest. I mean, I certainly I wouldn't mind having a bottle of Macallan 25 on hand, but it's not my favorite Scotch. I think it's probably the best Scotch I've had because it was really good, but it's not my favorite. If money was no object, I would fly in Ledaig and go to Binny's and get all their independent bottlings of Kalila. That's what I would do. I would rather have more bottles and have a selection rather than have a single super duper expensive bottle. I mean, I'm sure if I was to hit $1 billion lottery, I'm sure I would buy a very expensive bottle of Scotch. Next War series game. So if we're talking about can we see them over here? These guys, the GMT Next War games. Yeah, I think you could fairly describe several of them as mini monsters. I think Korea and Poland, absolutely. The next War expansion is going to have a significant amount of expansion stuff for Poland, I think. And they mostly have 2+ maps of footprint, even if there's actually only one map. So we're not talking about miniatures. Nothing against miniatures. Thanks for stopping by, Miniatures Guy. But I don't know that I have much of value to offer a miniatures person, to be honest, because I don't do that. So, I mean, there's a shit ton of. I mean, I will occasionally get caught watching a miniatures video, and there is a shit ton of quality miniatures content on YouTube. You don't need to hang out here. I mean, we're not. I'm not doing that. So again, nothing against miniatures, but Vietnam is one map. So I mean, certainly, I think the big campaign games that use the advanced rules, I think even if they are one map, they are edging into monster game territory. Do I have a topic for the next episode with Dan? Game stores. Yes, that is the topic. For next Monday, I don't have a topic, and will probably not have a topic until something like Friday, because that's usually how it works. So, and again, the topic is kind of just something to get us started with, because really, nobody cares about the topic. Maybe we'll get something interesting said, maybe we won't. The topic is just a starting place to get us in motion with whatever I want to rant about that particular night, and riff on what is going on in the chat. So, let's call it a night. It is 10:09 p.m. I would like to thank everybody for stopping by. Again, if you would like to support the channel, please check out the links in the video description and all that. I don't want to badger anybody about it, but it would help a lot to pick up more, even if it's for $1 or $3 or something like that on the patrons. And the merch is really nice, if I do say so for myself. So Poland has a whole second map for the operational, like the super strategic area 2. So they're pretty big. So let's move that to next week. Maybe we'll talk about monsters versus mini monsters or something like that. That could be our next topic. And let's face it, this channel being what it is, we're going to circle back to the topic of monster games at some point. Favorite air war game? target for tonight, or target for today. That's my best guess right now. I've never played an air war game that wasn't a solitaire game, to be honest. That's not true. I've played Red Storm. Favorite air war game in that context. I haven't played. I have several that I haven't played, and I don't believe that I can make that call now without having played the Burning Blue, for example. So, all right, I would like to thank everybody for stopping by. We will be back once again next Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern with the Counter Clipping stream. I would like to enjoin you to join us then. And don't forget to stop by Dan's channel on Wednesday night at 6:30. And we have other videos coming, which we've all talked about already. Thanks again for coming by. And until next time, happy gaming.